Yeah, well,
You've got
no,
you've got a better title.
no,
We're
no,
we're
no,
live streaming
no,
right
but
now, by the way, just to let you
yeah,
know.
well, I think it's good enough.
Okay.
The perfect title, that's usually what you find after you finish something, right?
Probably.
After
I
you
mean,
finish a book or after
yeah,
you,
we could always change it later. So um we'll see. Anyway, so it says one watching now. If
that's you.
is it, you think it's just me? Yeah. If
Well, I'm not watching.
if if anyone is watching, you guys can hear us. Let us know you can hear us, okay? Before we start.
Shoot.
You know that we had to come on because of the Dobbs ruling being released. So we have a few things to say. We're going to try to keep it somewhat short, but the title is something that I want to get at to women's rights as one casualty of a two-party system. But first, we'll talk a bit about Dobbs, about what I've seen so far that's constructive and not constructive in the wake of the release of the opinion yesterday. And, just give a bit of information for people who are not exactly aware of what the state of the law is and what the prospects are for women in the future who wish to obtain an abortion, but maybe are living in a state where it's now suddenly been banned, as we are here in Texas. So those are the sorts of things we want to talk about, in addition to other aspects of women's rights. The Democrats in some ways have not been champion of women's rights in other realms. And so, where is it that women can find political allies in this two-party system? It seems that there's attacks from both sides.
Reasonable people generally, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, Dobbs has overturned Roe versus Wade, and what that means is no, not automatically that abortion is outlawed or banned across the United States. What it means is that the issue goes back to the states. It just so happens today that there are a lot of states which are poised to, or have already, restricted abortion to a large extent. But there are a number of states that enacted laws saying that as soon as Roe versus Wade is overturned and they have the power, we hereby ban abortion. And Texas is one of those. So, for example, the way that I understand it right now is the opinion has been issued, but the final judgment, the official judgment from Supreme Court, has not been. What typically happens is that there is a waiting period in which either party could petition for a rehearing of this case. So, maybe there still could be some more procedure from the Supreme Court. I don't think it happens very often, but in any event, in a few weeks, you would expect that the actual judgment is issued. And once the judgment is issued in Texas, 30 days after that, all abortions are banned. And we're talking no exceptions for rape or incest. The ban starts as of the time of conception. So you can imagine how, with the Attorney General saying that he's going to very strictly enforce this law, how much are they going to start to get into your bedroom if conception is really the time, right? What qualifies as abortion? It could get pretty bad. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at some period of weeks until the
womb,
in your bedroom. So we're looking at, some period of weeks before the actual judgment is issued by the Supreme Court. Then this 30-day period starts, and then there's going to be a complete ban in Texas and some other states as well with respect to abortion. I looked to see what the state of the law is with respect to the ability to travel to obtain an abortion. And as far as I know, it is not yet illegal for a woman who is living in Texas to travel out of state to New Mexico, for example, where abortion is legal, Colorado as well. You could go there and obtain one, but I'm hearing that there are some legislators in Texas, state legislators, who want to pass a law also prohibiting that travel. I'll tell you the one thing that I have found extremely helpful to listen to in the last 24 hours, and it was because Barry Weiss put it out again with her Substack. When the draft opinion was leaked a little while ago, Barry Weiss got an interview with Professor Akhil Amar from Yale Law School. And some of you if you've been following me for a very long time, back to the time when I was a research assistant for Leonard Peikoff on his radio show, which was a long time ago, you may remember that we interviewed Professor Akhil Amar for the radio show. Amar was very influential on my thinking about privacy. I wrote a dissertation on the right to privacy, rooting privacy in the rights to property and contract. And Professor Amar had a book called Fourth Amendment First Principles that was very influential on my thinking. So as soon as I saw that Barry Weiss had interviewed Akhil Amar, did a podcast with him discussing the fact that while he was pro-choice, he's a pro-choice liberal, Amar, he nonetheless agrees with Alito's analysis in Dobbs about Roe versus Wade. So, of course, I found that fascinating, had to listen to it. I'm about 2/3 the way through the podcast. You can find it on Spotify. And I highly recommend
Substack as well.
Yeah, well, she'll link to it on the Substack. But yeah, she issued a Substack today, basically setting the tone of civil debate about this issue, which I think is also, she's excellent, Barry. But the podcast itself is a demonstration of what a civil debate about an issue looks like, because at certain points, Barry was bringing up challenges to what Amar was saying. And she was asking questions like, is this ruling and these, signing on to this ruling, so not just Alito, but could you also look at Barrett and Kavanaugh and the things that they've said during their confirmation hearings when they were confirmed as Supreme Court justices? Could you see them as having lied in those hearings? And Amar pushed back on her and said, this is the podcast called Honestly, that's her podcast name. And he says, we're going to be honest about this. And he says, no, really, you're just wrong. And so, they're having this discussion. They disagree about certain things. They both agree that a woman should have a right to choose an abortion, a legal right to choose an abortion, but they had some disagreements about Roe versus Wade, whether it should have been overturned, whether the justices had been honest when they were asked to speak about their view of Roe versus Wade in their confirmation hearings, et cetera. It's a really valuable podcast. So I highly recommend that. So I can tell you a little bit about the analysis, right? The reason that Amar says that Roe versus Wade was wrong is because, quite simply, abortion is not a right that is enumerated in the Constitution. There's no right to abortion in the Constitution. And if he's going to look in any of the Bill of Rights, the amendments to be the grounding for a woman's right to abortion, he says it would have to be in the 14th Amendment, because what you're dealing with here is you're dealing with, the states restricting the exercise of this right. And he says in the 14th Amendment, it says that you cannot be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law. But in all of the states that have these bans, this is legislation. It's gone through, their House and their Senate and every state, and the governor signed it. And so, there's been due process, he says. And another piece that I've come by in the last 24 hours that is worth looking at was from Reason Magazine. And in Reason Magazine, Damon Root, I believe, is the author, who pointed out the fact that maybe you could say that Alito overlooked the Ninth Amendment. And he says that you should look to the Ninth Amendment because, as Madison, who is quoted in Root's piece, observed, there was a hesitancy about putting forth a Bill of Rights because the feeling was if you laid out a list of rights, then anything that wasn't in that list was going to be considered as, fair game for
Exhaustive.
government
Yeah,
to just violate. And he says, well, I've taken care of that because I've made this thing called the Ninth Amendment, which says that if they aren't specifically enumerated, then it's either going to be right for the state or the people. Now, the other thing that Amar looked back, again, he was looking at the history with the 14th Amendment. What was the state of abortion law in America when you had the 14th Amendment? What was the state of abortion law when Roe versus Wade was enacted? When it was decided, Roe versus Wade in 1973. Apparently, Roe versus Wade ended up invalidating state law in something like 47 states or something. So there were restrictions, a lot of restrictions on abortion. And when the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution, when it was enacted and amended into the Constitution, at that time, that was the 1860s, Amar observed that there were a lot of regulations about abortion then as well in the United States. So how is it that you could say, well, the Ninth Amendment could still ground a woman's right to abortion and that Roe versus Wade shouldn't be overturned after all? What Root is looking at in terms of history was the common law of England, which was an influence on our original Constitution. And apparently in the common law, they didn't even consider these early term pregnancy terminations as abortions at all. You didn't even consider the fetus as an entity, that was cognizable in the law until something called quickening occurred, which was when the woman could feel movement. And that was often not until even as late as 25 weeks or so, depending. So it was quite late. And so you've got two different ideas about, Roe versus Wade. Did it need to be overturned? Did it not need to be overturned? From Amar's standpoint, there's no grounding for a right to abortion in the Constitution. He focused primarily on the 14th Amendment, and he looked at the history in the United States when the 14th Amendment was added to the Constitution, and also the law of the states when Roe versus Wade itself was decided. And he put Roe versus Wade in the class of Supreme Court decisions that needed to be overturned because there was an injustice done, that it was extremely wrong in light of constitutional jurisprudence. And he talks about Brown versus Board of Education and other landmark Supreme Court opinions, which just overturned unjust and constitutionally indefensible law. That's Amar's position. Root, on the other hand, like I said, focused on the Ninth Amendment. And he believes that if you look at the Ninth Amendment and the time that it was added to the Constitution and the fact that our law at the time did not regulate abortion, that our law was based on British common law, which allowed for at least earlier term abortions, that the picture might be quite different than what you would get in Alito's opinion. Either way, what is happening is it's just being turned over to the states. And then, normatively, what your view is about whether a woman's right to abortion should be protected is something that you now have to, at least under this regime, take up with the state government. And as I said, a number of states already have laws in place such that this opinion, the mere issuing of this opinion, is going to trigger a complete ban on abortion, and it's going to affect a lot of women. I'll try to drop in the description and the notes and stuff some links both to the Amar podcast and also to the news articles that talk about which states are doing what and et cetera. But women are facing this reality that if a circumstance occurs in which they decide they want to obtain an abortion, they would have to travel someplace else. And one thing that Amar suggested, well, there's two sort of reassuring things that Amar suggested in his podcast. One is that in the constitutional jurisprudence and also in the stated opinions of the Supreme Court justices themselves, there appears to be little. Oh, you had to get the cat. What was she doing?
Cat attack.
Oh no. Yeah, the cats are a little crazy sometimes. So in both their stated opinions and then also in constitutional jurisprudence, there's very little danger of what some people have been saying, which is that the next thing that's going to be jeopardized and put at risk is your ability to obtain contraception. Amar doesn't see any reasonable threat of Griswold or Eisenstadt being overturned at all. Those are the two. Griswold was for married people can obtain contraception. Eisenstadt says, oh, unmarried people can too, right? Equal protection. So yeah, I know, what a concept, right? So that's not a danger at all. And then the other thing that he suggested, and I would suggest, again, if we want to go forward, Republicans, I would stop spiking the football because it is endangering your red wave. The spike the football, the champagne, the gloating, all the stuff about this is not going to help your red wave at all. And so many of us have been counting on the red wave to just save us from supply chain and inflation and various things. And you're jeopardizing all of this with your gloating, which I don't know. You have to get out of your head or something, because
gloating and a lack of empathy, right? Because
you have to be realistic about this. Who wants an abortion? Nobody wants to have an abortion, right? But nobody wants to be trapped having been raped or incest or knowing. And Amar does an excellent job of explaining exactly why normatively he's in favor of a woman's right to choose. He says there are very difficult situations in which he says he personally will defer to a woman to decide for herself over a government deciding for her. And the type of situation you can imagine is you have been told by your obstetrician that the fetus is going to be stillborn, is not going to survive. And so you're just carrying for no reason, essentially. And you're in a situation, suppose you desperately want to be pregnant, and that's the situation he's putting there. The longer you carry and then you have this miscarriage and stuff, it's going to prevent you from having a healthy pregnancy during that whole time period. And maybe there's some damage that your body is going to undergo that's going to impact the ability for you to have a healthy wanted pregnancy in the future. And that's just one situation. So, going around and spiking the football and being so tone deaf to the interests of women who are in these horrible, heart-wrenching situations, as if, I heard, I think it was Michelle Bachmann was one of these politicians years ago who gave, some speech, and they give these disconnected speeches on the floor of the House or the Senate or whatever. And she was saying something about, oh yeah, women, they just go get their latte and then they go get an abortion, as if it's some casual thing that they go through. It is insane to speak about it that way. I just, and maybe there are some leftist demonstrators out there who, they go, oh yeah, I'm going to be proud of abortion and whatever. I don't think rational people are that way either, right? But, you can't be tone deaf, and your spike the football is really going to jeopardize the red wave. Anyway, what Amar suggests practically is if the Democrats wanted to help women, concretely in a very good way, and, do it in a measured way that wasn't going to make the whole situation worse, because we have enough division and polarity in our country. What could you do? You could pass a law to ensure that even if Texas completely bans abortion or other states completely ban abortion, that every individual has a right to travel to another state and obtain an abortion if they want to, because it is so tyrannical for a politician in Texas to tell a woman, not only do we not believe in offering abortion in Texas, so we're going to prohibit it here,
Yeah.
but you are trapped here.
Mhm.
You have to do exactly, you cannot go anywhere else where they offer it, a neighboring state. We are so arrogant. We are so going to take control of your life that we're going to tell you what to do to that extent. So at least they could pass a law like that. And if they did it in a measured way, and, you know, I don't know, AOC has been saying horrible things. And some people have said that the stuff that AOC has been saying amounts to fomenting an insurrection. I don't know if it goes that far, but I'm sure a lot of what she said has been unhelpful. Let's be helpful, right? So Amar is very measured, and he says, hey, this is the thing that you can do. And so as I've been sort of percolating over this in the last 24 hours or so, what I finally came to was this, right? Because I think, you know, being in Texas, why did I come to Texas? I wanted to escape Gavin Newsom telling me what I could do with my body in California.
Still
right?
an issue of medical freedom.
Yes, yes. And so here we are in Texas, and they're doing it with respect to a different issue. And so I think that because there are so many sort of, you know, kind of more classical liberal types who came to Texas, they want the economic freedom of Texas. They know that it's kind of purple here, and they have a chance of living a decent free life here and not paying income tax, right?
Conversation, right?
Yeah.
Friends who were also considering a move, and then yeah, and I mean that was my main thought at this point. There are many more reasonable people than we are allowed to perceive with these idiotic and can I call them radical plans all the time? I mean, the Republican gloating, and you know, it's not even Republican, it's, you know, the theocratic faction of the Republicans.
Yeah, I'm sure not all Republicans are that way, but
no. And then, you know, the whole party, the whole platform becomes, you know, is taken hostage. And so it's really rather similar to the way, you know, certain transgender activists have taken hostage the Democratic Party. And normal people, may I describe them this way? Normal people that I think are, you know, rather vast majority of the people, they feel constrained, they feel compelled to choose the other party because this particular fear, you know, really irks them. And, you know, in either case, I understand, but where does it leave normal people who want, you know, who, the way I see it, we're fundamentally, quote unquote, libertarian, because they think that adults should have the right to live their lives the way they see fit without causing damage to other people.
Right.
And that's it. So that's a very simple principle, but the whole time people are being pushed around with these fears. And of course, it's very attractive also for party brass to play it out that way.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you know, for his part, the Attorney General here in Texas put out this statement talking about the fact that, you know, yes, there's going to be a ban, and it's going to be after 30 days after the judgment is actually issued, which hasn't happened yet, et cetera. So he's explaining the mechanics of it. But then he also declared that there is a state agency holiday annually at the time of this ruling. So there's your football spike. Now, so I had to think, for me, right? I'm here in Texas. I was going for sure to vote for Greg Abbott in the fall. I'm not so sure about it now. And I've been thinking about, you know, what is it that would make me vote for this guy Beto, who I don't want to have as my governor. You know, I don't want him as my governor. He's just going to have, you know, raise taxes and grab guns and who knows what other damage he would do. But at a certain point, you're going to draw a line and say, okay, here's, you know, when I would do it. So I decided when I would do it is if Texas passes and Abbott signs something that purports to prevent women in Texas from traveling to obtain an abortion, I'll vote for Beto and then probably move both. I'll do both those things. So Texas, as much as I've been grateful to you, there's only so much you can put up with. So yeah, they have their ban in place. They don't want abortions to be performed here. Okay, fine. But then if you try to trap women and prevent them from traveling to go and live their lives the way they see fit, that is not good. This is not a 21st century way to run a government.
No.
So there's my line. I will vote for Beto and or move. I still reserve the right to vote for Beto if there's too much.
You do?
Yeah.
Of course.
But I don't want to. I don't.
No.
Got neighbors, with their signs, Beto for Texas, right? Beto for Texas, it says, and I always want to go and vandalize it and say Beto for taxes because that's what it's going to be, right? So ridiculous. I don't want him to be my governor. But anyway, so there's my thing. As far as I know, though, suppose states do try to pass those laws. I didn't hear Amar talk about this yet, but again, I've got the last third to listen to still. But he seems to be on the assumption, and the court's opinions seem to be written on the assumption that women could always travel to a different state. And of course, it's true. He mentioned and he suggested that our federal legislators could pass a federal law just to put a finer point on it and ensure that women would be protected
not be imprisoned
by one state or the other. Yeah. So probably it wouldn't be upheld. So I think that if you are really, and this is the thing, you're not going to make a habit of having a bunch of abortions, right? So this is something where, practically speaking, you could live in a red state and you could still, have a contingency plan that if, something terrible happens. There are also medications that can affect an very early abortion that some women will get access to. And whether those women would be prosecuted is a whole other question. So there are ways to deal with, a complete ban in the state that you live in and manage, but so the question is, right now we're seeing the Republicans be tone deaf to and really disregard the interests of women who are, if they're in that situation, they're in one of the most difficult situations in their lives. And they're just, putting a big middle finger up at those women and saying, yeah, just deal with it. We're going to make a terrible situation that you're in even worse.
We're going to make your life decisions.
Yeah. There was a statement from Abbott where he says, and again, remember in Texas, no exception for incest, for rape, for any of this stuff, right? And it's right at conception. And Abbott, tone deaf, says, we have all of these great resources to help you during the pregnancy that you don't want and shouldn't have to bear. We have, expansion of Medicaid and blah, 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 blah. You think that's going to be any consolation? No. So the Republicans, you are not my friend. You are disregarding the interests of women who are in horrible, heart-wrenching situations. And you're telling them that they must handle it in the way that they prescribe. They're telling you what to do. The Republicans are just not women's friends. Now, at the same time, we're in a situation where the Democrats are pretending to be your friend, but last week they were all in favor of having transgender persons, transgender females in particular, both have access to women's restrooms in ways that have had dire consequences, right? And then the other thing that's been happening, of course, is the destruction of women's sports. Now, there has been some pushback about that. Now, I'm glad to see some of the international sport organizations are preserving For instance, women's swimming is one where I'm seeing some movement about that, which is excellent. It is just simply not fair to allow someone who has transitioned anywhere after any part of puberty, right? Because puberty is when biological males start to gain muscle mass. And, the fact that they later transition to become females does not negate the advantage that they have, as we've seen. So, we're starting to at least see some of this private sports organizations push back, but we have not seen enough protection from even Republican politicians haven't protected women enough in this realm. I've understood that in a couple states, at least, you've had Republican governors who have been given the opportunity to help women's sports and have declined to take advantage of the opportunity by way of legislation that's come on their desk. So he says, I don't mean to sound presumptive, but a plurality of women support these abortion bans. Where is your empathy for them? No. Sorry. Rights belong to individuals. No. Individuals.
So those women have
the
right to decide on their lives.
Right.
Any individual has the right to decide on theirs.
Socrates should not have had the hemlock. He should not have been forced to drink the hemlock. I don't care. You have your democracy and that's fine, but there are rights, and you need to talk about when rights begin. John Wayne says, isn't it up to the owner organizer of a sport event to decide whether trans women can participate alongside women? Yes. Yes. Well, so
if there's an association involved, of course,
you
organize an event under the aegis of some organization or other, they'll specify their rules, right? So sure, that's true.
So laws are illegitimate now. Some laws are unjust. Some laws are unjust. Yeah. And then the question is, what do you do in a face of unjust law? Do you move? Do you decide to consciously disobey an unjust law, as Martin Luther King and many others have done? A number of Griswold versus Connecticut, and I think Eisenstadt v. Baird as well, resulted from conscientious disobedience of a law in order to challenge it. So there are a number of ways to deal with an unjust law. Some people choose, as Ayn Rand did, right? She believed taxation is theft, but she paid her taxes and yet spoke out against the morality of the income tax all the time. So no, illegitimate has to do more with whether it was procedurally correct. And again, we could talk about the 9th versus the 14th Amendment as the locus for a woman's right to abortion in the Constitution, and whether the ruling was illegitimate by Alito, right? But that's an issue of legitimacy. Justice of the law is an entirely different thing. And there are a number of issues on which our Constitution was unjust, unfortunately. So, our Constitution was not perfect. It was quite good, but no, it wasn't perfect. You had something.
No, it's fine. No, I think that's also where some of the focus could be laid on the fact that Roe versus Wade, was so that's a bit of a tasteless metaphor. Let's say that it was at risk from the very beginning. So in that sense, clearing the field to come up with a better solution is not bad per se. It could over time improve the situation, but of course it's going to take a lot of clear thinking and precise debating, I guess.
No, it definitely will.
And
so
I think 2/3, at least those were polls, 2/3 of the population actually were in favor of keeping it in place, meaning that
given
as a simplified conception, they did not want abortion banned federally, because that's of course the simple the simple interpretation thereof. And yeah, of course, if you do not properly found a law, or you found it in such a way that it becomes untenable over time, yeah,
Right.
it's going to be a short-lived victory, right?
There are two things that I've written in the past that are relevant to this. One was many years ago when I was actually back here in Texas. I was teaching at UT Austin for a year. I wrote a book review, and that it appeared in the journal Ethics. And it was about a book, Natural Rights and the Right to Choose, by Hadley Arks. And in the book, Hadley Arks lays out the whole plan for overturning Roe versus Wade. And his plan, it was going to be within the confines of the balancing test that was in Roe versus Wade itself, right? So, they looked at what was the existing treatment of a fetus under all the various state laws, and this and that and the other. And so, they were trying to figure out how of what magnitude was the state's interest in potential life, and balance it against women's rights. And that's how they had the whole, or women's interests, as they would call it. And then that's how they ended up with their 3-trimester balancing test in Roe versus Wade. Very pragmatic. But what the Republicans were focused on, at least at that time, was this strategy to look at all the different factors that Roe versus Wade, that opinion, took into account, and change the law. So, for example, you had one of the Bushes, George Bush, either his senior or his the son W. One of them had passed a law giving benefits to fetuses under Medicaid or something. So any little law that you could pass that would treat a fetus as a person, in the mind of Arks and these other strategists, was just one more way to get the balancing test of Roe versus Wade to go in the favor of the fetus and against the woman, and so that you would overturn in that way. But what Alito does is just say, look, it's just this right doesn't appear in the Constitution at all. So at least that would be, like you say, clearing the slate and opening for a better approach, perhaps a Ninth Amendment oriented approach, et cetera. There could be, a federal law establishing a woman's right up to a certain point. Who knows what we're going to see here in the future, and on what ground the federal law would be passed, and if it would be upheld. And, there's a lot that could happen in the future here. It'd be best to do these things in a civil way, and to really think about, how can people who have very different views about controversial issues coexist either within a country or within a state, et cetera. And like I said, I've drawn my line, which is that, yeah, okay, you're going to have your abortion ban. I think it's wrong. But if you then pile on and say, and you can't escape either, you can't even travel to another state to get this done in an unfortunate circumstance, that's when, for me, you've crossed a line, and I'm going to start voting for the other party, right? And so everybody has to think about where you do this. Yeah.
So then there's the legal hope. Politically, I think you can, I would say the need for a reasonable political platform for, all, let's say, we, the reasonable people, to vote for. Because if these two parties continue to be hijacked by, dictatorial and ambitious figures, I don't think anybody besides them, of course, and they love to hate each other. But if within those parties, more reasonable people do not stand up and offer options that are more favorable to individual rights, what are normal people supposed to do? And at a certain point, we will need an alternative party. So I've had my discussions about whether the Libertarian Party would be able to provide that. I don't know.
So we have our troll of the day here. Women's rights was a mistake.
Oh, that's even the name of the.
Yeah. Patriarchy built. You meant to say built. You said build. That's a typo
well,
there.
So under patriarchy, spelling will be completely different.
Is that it? That's
well,
great.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. So women's rights. So go tell your mother. Go tell your mother that women's rights was a mistake.
But
there's that.
They can go to Iran too. It's a perfect example of a patriarch.
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia.
Sure.
Afghanistan.
Sure.
Yeah. Great fun there.
Yeah.
Gee. Well, is it any different? I mean, last week we felt sort of endorsed by having the sex bot. You remember, right?
Sure.
Can we sort of make a comparison between the two phenomena?
I suppose so. But yeah, so we are going to, as individual women, have to navigate. I don't know if a centrist party like the one that Yang is starting to talk about and Elon Musk has kind of cautiously been in favor of is
Tulsi Gabbard, who made her overture. Right?
I would have liked to have seen her actually come out with some sort of statement about the ruling yesterday, though, because I have not seen it yet. Now, I work for Parler, as some people know, and Tulsi is active on Parler. And the video that I saw her post today was something along the lines of, well, the Democrats don't really care about women's rights. And I think that's true, as evidenced by all of this, kind of prioritizing the interests of transgender females over women in various circumstances. But at the same time, Tulsi, come on out and tell us what you think. At least do what Barry and what Akhil Amar are doing, right? Which is
they're not politicians, right?
No, I know. But Barry Weiss's discussion with Akhil Amar is just top notch. Highly recommend that. In the meantime, as far as I'm concerned, what do I do living in Texas where's this, this ban exists? I watch, I wait and see. I don't want to vote for Beto, but if they do insist on trying to ban travel, then I would feel that would be enough of a situation where I would vote for Beto and then maybe also leave. Depending, we'll see. But I also want to see what happens in the next couple of years, right? Because as I understand it, Florida is one of these trigger states where there is an abortion ban. And this is under DeSantis, who I otherwise like, and who many of us were thinking would be a good presidential candidate. If we ended up with a President DeSantis and you had a nationwide abortion ban, and there was literally no place for a woman to go at all, this is a terrible situation. Yeah. So I don't know if I vote Republican in the next election, which is what I was looking forward to doing. Are we going to get a centrist party? Maybe it would be the time for it. If they're going to give us this false alternative, it's going to be Biden or worse, which it's hard to imagine anything worse than Biden. Or DeSantis, and trying, they're going to enact an entire nationwide abortion ban and have nobody to stop them. I just don't see it. So, but this is all too soon. Let's wait and see what happens, right? There's going to be in Austin, I understand, a demonstration that Beto is leading tomorrow. And I'm not going to go to a demonstration. I mean, I'm here telling you exactly what my demonstration is, which is that I'll vote for that jerk if I have to, but only if I have to. And I'm going to hold my nose and, I don't know, throw up afterwards if I have to vote for him. But, it'll be interesting for me to see what sort of turnout he gets, because I think it's going to be surprising some people. There's so many people who are they just don't think it's that significant an issue. They can't imagine. Usually it's guys talking on social media. Oh, certainly you wouldn't vote for Beto over this. It's like, well, I might, I don't see how you can just dismiss it so cavalierly.
That of course was the guy or girl justifiably stupid, or was another one? I'd read that before, that it's mainly women who are against abortion. Does that even change anything? No, it doesn't. But you can imagine that there's a
well, and a plurality is not a majority either, right? So
no,
there's that.
no.
Yeah.
But of course, either you have individual rights, or no, of course, women are not a monolith. Yeah.
Do demonstrations do anything? Demonstrations bring you face to face with people that you agree with on an issue that's important to you enough to go out and do something. So there's something, I mean, I went all the way to Miami twice when we were trying to keep Ilian Gonzalez here, and then also did a demonstration up in Los Angeles and found personally some value.
Sure. And then recently, and this is not something you or I participated in, there was the truckers, of course.
Yes.
And
that was quite effective.
Yeah. And so indeed, it brings a topic to the forefront, and in the end, with the way things played out, of course, it showed how egregious, what's his name?
Trudeau. Wow,
Trudeau was in abusing the law and basically suppressing dissent. So yeah.
Are the Libertarians putting Dave Smith as their candidate? I wasn't aware of that.
No, neither was
I think I'm connected with him on Twitter, Dave Smith. I haven't exchanged any messages with him for quite some time, but
now might be the time.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking forward to hopefully voting for a DeSantis in 2024, but that is now for me an open question. Again, it's one thing for you to say, okay, we're going to leave this up to the states. I'm still not 100% sure that under the Constitution, that's the right way to go, because as I said, there might be a Ninth Amendment rationale to ground the right that was in Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was abysmal. By the way, I do have an old paper. I was mentioning I had two different publications that were relevant. One was the book review of Natural Rights and the Right to Choose by Hadley Yarks. And then the second was the article that I have called Pragmatism and Privacy, where I talk about the fact that privacy from the outset has been deemed an entirely pragmatic right. It's not even really a right, because at the very beginning in that article in 1890, when Warren and Brandeis were proposing a unique right to privacy, they were saying that it was always going to have to be balanced against the interests of society, the interest of the state, et cetera. It's not absolute. And so it has a different origin than, a different history than a right to contract or a right to property, which, to use more what we would call objectivist terminology or Rand's philosophy terminology, you would say the right was always treated as absolute within a context. And that was never true for privacy. The grounding of a woman's right to choose an abortion on privacy was terrible. Of course it was. It was a very poorly reasoned opinion. So many people agree about that. Whether it could be grounded in the Constitution on another basis is something, again, that I think you can debate about. Ninth Amendment and the history of the British common law versus 14th Amendment and some of the original intent, American law arguments that Akhil Amar was making. But, either way, then if you say, okay, well, there's no basis in constitutional law for this, you could make an amendment, right? I mean, that's always open too. I doubt that people are going to do that, but you could have a federal law protecting certain aspects of it, and that could be upheld under our Constitution. So there's always that avenue. But, at least if you're going to just, if you say, oh, all we're doing is kicking it back to the states and we're going to let the states decide and everybody have their little laboratories of experimentation and the way that you like to talk about state law and states' rights and et cetera, then let it be that. And don't go for a nationwide ban, and don't go for travel bans in your individual states. You don't want an abortion to take place in your state. Okay. I think you're wrong, but okay. At least leave the women who are in these terrible predicaments free to help themselves if they really need to. So that's my view. We're going to, have to just wait and see how this all plays out. What are the poll numbers going to look like? Is Texas going to flip blue? You guys say it's not possible. I think it's possible. John Wayne says, isn't the Ninth Amendment supposed to protect rights which aren't specified? Exactly. If you go look, last day or two, Reason Magazine talks, the headline is something like, Alito's opinion is disregarding the Ninth Amendment, something like that. And it's written by Damon Root, and he talks about the Ninth Amendment, and in particular, Madison quoted about the Ninth Amendment, specifically reserving to people rights that are not enumerated in the Constitution. And that, of course, at that time, the context of the rights that were considered to belong to women included the right to terminate an early pregnancy, at least before the time of what they called quickening. So, Oh, I wanted to bring up one more thing, and I keep forgetting to do it, and I thought of it a couple times here. Barry Weiss brought up an argument to Akhil Amar that I thought was a quite good one, because Amar went through some of the history of the times that the Supreme Court in the past had overturned precedent in the name of a correct and just interpretation of the Constitution. So he talked about Brown versus Board of Education, and he also talked about the Warren Court in the 60s, where they were expanding the rights of criminal defendants to jury trial and representation and et cetera. And Barry was saying, well, isn't it true that in the past, when the court has overturned these longstanding precedents, that they've done it in the name of expanding rights for individuals? And by contrast, this Dobbs opinion actually takes away rights from women. And so it would not fall into these other examples. And so Amar says, no, you're wrong, because here is one example of a time in which the court reversed existing precedent, longstanding precedent, and at the same time contracted the rights belonging to individuals. And what he cited was the 1930s court that overruled Lochner and other Supreme Court cases that were decided on the basis of a right to contract, the freedom of contract or property. There were a number of early 1900s, late 1800s decisions in which the Supreme Court struck down state laws that purported to regulate businesses and regulate the contracts between employers and employees. And in the 1930s, those opinions were overturned. Lochner, in particular, that decided in 1905, you can go back and read it, was a notable precedent in this regard. And so Amar cited that, saying, look, this has been done before, and it was right to do then. And so you can't say that it's wrong to do this now simply because it results in a taking away of rights. But this is a place where I think I disagree with Amar, that Lochner in 1905 was probably correctly decided. And I know that I'm not alone in this. Institute for Justice, Pacific Legal Foundation, other libertarian public interest law firms have been making a whole career and basically, I think, litigation strategy out of reviving those legal precedents that protect people's freedom of contract and right to property. So, Amar had a good answer, But I think Amar's premise of his answer was wrong because he was relying upon the overturning of precedent that had upheld people's rights to property and contract. And I think those rulings were probably correct and not the others. And I know that there are others who agree with me there. So I think Barry was very smart to point out that, you know, if the Supreme Court is doing this, if it's overturning longstanding precedent, shouldn't it do it in the name of expanding rights for people, not taking them away? That should be a predominant factor. And I think that's what's behind most people, even though they know that Roe versus Wade was poorly decided, they still thought it shouldn't be overturned.
Well, yeah. In practical terms, I mean, the practical effects, right?
John here in the chat room is asking, do you think the Democrats and left will be emboldened to stack the court? Yeah, that is one of the things that I'm concerned about. I think it would be a very bad idea, but I think they will. Well, I think that many people will be like me, you know, thinking, at what point do I change my strategy of voting for Republicans in the next couple elections? And do I shift over and vote for Democrats? There are a number of things that are at risk at this point, I think, because of this.
I mean, the fact of all these this precedent being based on compromise and on pragmatism, it also shows you how fundamental it is to have a proper discussion, you know, as you were just now, figuring out how you can solidly base these rights, because the prospect of having the Supreme Court stacked, of course, in one way or another, you know, in the absence of valid theory and solid IDs, the result will be disastrous, because you can only imagine what's going to happen 2 years from now, and where will it stop? So it's going to be some type of legal anarchy. So yeah, the importance of having these discussions amicably, respectfully, but very seriously is going to be essential the coming time, more than before even. It shows you how untenable poorly founded IDs become over time.
Definitely. So you mean amicably and respectfully, like our commenter in the chat room who says, "Are you planning an abortion, Amy?"
No. Under patriarchy, you don't use "you," so that's why it says "are planning an abortion."
Oh.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of things
I have to learn.
We don't know. The rules under patriarchy are going to be spectacular. But you know, capricious something is
capricious black box.
Capricious
black box would be a perfect description of the comment moderation tactics over at my competitors. So it's great, but too bad you're being rude to me. I liked your handle.
Oh, come on. They're based in Afghanistan.
Are they?
Yeah, that's a normal thing to say over there.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. Anyway, I think that's about all I had to say on this topic today. Did I leave anything out that I was mulling about earlier? I was telling him, poor guy, you know, normally you would avoid talking about abortion most of the time, right? I mean, it's an unpleasant topic, and but here we are. The opinion was, you know, released yesterday, and so this was the time to do it. I will grab right after I turn everything off here. I'm going to grab the 2 resources, at least, that I talked about. Maybe there's going to be 3. Okay, there's 3, maybe 4. There's a few things that I'm going to do. I'm going to give you the podcast that you have to listen to between Barry Weiss and Akhil Amar. I'm going to give you the Reason magazine from Damon Root, where he talks about the 9th Amendment rationale for this right to choose an abortion. And, you know, I choose my language very carefully about these things. Okay. And then the other ones that I would give you would be, I have an article just talking about which states are banning it, and it's a helpful map. And then another one talking about Texas in particular, what they're doing, with respect to it going into effect 30 days after, and, that they don't have a travel ban yet, but are considering it, et cetera. I'll give you all those resources in the descriptive material. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you like this and you end up wanting to support the stuff that I'm doing, you can find me on Locals or Patreon. Don't Let It Go if you search under both of those. Maybe on Patreon you find me at Amy Peikoff, Peikoff, but on Locals I'm at Don't Let It Go. So thanks, everybody. I hope you can enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we'll keep our eyes open and see how this goes forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep living the good life.
Yeah.